and gentlemen.
Hello?
Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello?
Is this Mrs. Dorothy Letterman?
That's right, Dorothy.
Yes, it is. Who's this?
Are you the mother of David Letterman who does Late Night on NBC?
Oh, yes, I am. Well,
She was permanently excluded afterward, never asked back for a guest spot or recognition event, not even when viewership declined and audiences moved on. One day, she was Carson's prized performer. The next, she vanished without explanation, a quiet, harsh banishment. She was permanently barred from returning to Johnny Carson's program following this incident, and she wasn't the only one. Several celebrities similarly found themselves on Johnny Carson's unfavorable side, and when Johnny grew distant, Hollywood turned away. What kind of evening television monarch builds his dominion through charisma and intimidation? We're going to discover that now. There was an era in entertainment when a single program controlled everything. If visibility was your goal, this was your destination. If you sought credibility, you needed only secure that brief 5-minute segment. And if you performed exceptionally, your circumstances transformed overnight. But there was a condition. That visibility came with unspoken regulations everyone inherently understood. And most troubling, you never needed to actively upset industry power brokers because once that happened, you were finished. Some of the industry's most prominent figures suddenly found themselves excluded, not due to lack of talent or audience appreciation, but because Johnny Carson decided they no longer belonged. And once Johnny rejected you, the entire industry followed suit. The interesting part is that most viewers at home never witnessed this dynamic. They simply tuned in for entertainment. But behind the comedy and applause existed subtle tension. One misstep, one misinterpreted moment, and it was over. Sometimes it was straightforward. If a guest pushed a joke too far or prevented Johnny from delivering the final punchline, problems arose. Other times, deeper issues emerged from loyalty concerns and business decisions perceived as betrayal. Then, there were the personal disputes that began off stage and concluded in complete silence. What made it particularly intense was its subtlety. Nobody faced public confrontation. There weren't dramatic conflicts or messy media coverage. People simply stopped appearing, and inquiries were met with shrugs or quiet acknowledgments of how things work. But for those experiencing this silence, it was devastating. Years of career building could disappear with one missed invitation. Being prohibited from Carson's show damaged more than pride. It could destroy your professional prospects. That's the untold aspect of the story. The reality existed behind the scenes in names never mentioned again, and guest chairs that remained vacant. So what gave The Tonight Show such influence? What granted it such control over careers, reputations, and futures? To understand that, we must examine the program itself, The Tonight Show period. It's difficult to convey the significance of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson unless you experienced it firsthand. This wasn't merely a late evening talk program. It was the premier destination, especially for emerging talent, nervous comedians, or established actors promoting new films. Simply put, securing a spot on The Tonight Show guaranteed success. Johnny possessed a way of making everything appear effortless. His subtle smile, the way he allowed punchlines to linger briefly longer than expected. His comedic timing was innate, and Karnak the Magnificent was extraordinary, dressed like a budget fortune teller, holding sealed envelopes to his forehead and delivering jokes that somehow became funnier through their absurdity. It was silly and unusual, but also iconic. The true power emerged in how easily he could establish a career with one nod, one laugh, and one simple gesture, inviting a performer to the interview seat after their act. That Carson invitation was the ultimate achievement. Performers like David Letterman or Jerry Seinfeld could attest to that moment's significance. When asked, they'd confirm it changed everything. Millions viewed the program nightly. This predated streaming services. Before you could watch segments on your phone while partially listening to audio content, you either watched Johnny live or missed the broadcast. And believe me, nobody wanted to miss it. The appeal was his opening monologue, sketches, guests, and musical performances, a format copied extensively since then. Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel, both talk show hosts, adopted it. Even Stephen Colbert, who currently hosts The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, employs this structure today. Carson didn't simply host a program. He created the template for evening television as we know it. He effortlessly managed that enterprise for 30 years, and throughout most of it, he was untouchable. But when cameras stopped recording and applause faded, a different Johnny emerged. Behind the charm and jokes, situations weren't nearly as smooth. Sometimes they became downright unpleasant. Carson's influence had disadvantages. If you displeased him, consequences followed. You weren't just removed from the show. You were removed from the conversation entirely. While Johnny's approval could establish your career, losing that approval could completely ruin you. This wasn't merely about wounded pride or missing a television appearance. Being banned from The Tonight Show then was like being erased from industry memory. Booking agents stopped calling, studio executives became hesitant, and other programs maintained distance, fearing they might upset Johnny. He never needed to make public statements. His silence communicated clearly enough. Everyone understood if Carson finished with you, you were finished. It was especially brutal because no public declaration was necessary. He simply needed to discuss his day, while the person who displeased him stopped receiving bookings, something industry insiders always noticed. Some comedians attempted to dismiss it. Others, like Rich Little, learned through experience. Rich Little, a renowned impressionist, was removed for mocking Johnny excessively, though officially his material had reportedly grown stale. Another comedian was Dana Carvey, who performed an accurate Carson impression while promoting Wayne's World. Carson disliked it, said nothing about it, but banned Carvey nonetheless. The most frightening aspect was the absence of clear boundaries or guidelines indicating where the line existed until you crossed it. So who dared challenge Johnny, and who suffered the consequences? The Joan Rivers incident? If anyone received Johnny Carson's mentorship, it was Joan Rivers. During the 1960s, she was a fresh, straightforward comedian with sharp wit and determination that attracted Johnny. He featured her on The Tonight Show, where female comedians weren't common, making her a regular guest. Beyond that, he gave her an opportunity for national recognition, especially after she faced numerous rejections for being supposedly irrelevant at just 31 years old. Joan had been working diligently in comedy clubs, struggling for performances, barely surviving when Carson brought her onto The Tonight Show. When she delivered an outstanding first performance, he turned toward the camera, smiled, and told America, "You'll be hearing much more about this performer." That single statement changed everything. Overnight, Rivers transitioned from obscurity to becoming a Tonight Show writer thanks to Carson. He not only provided her an opportunity to develop, he mentored, supported, and even appointed her as his permanent substitute host during his absences. To outsiders, they appeared an ideal partnership, the evening television king and his trusted successor. But beneath the laughter and applause, conflict brewed. In 1986, Joan received an offer from Fox to create her own evening program. This was groundbreaking news, as Fox was a newly established network, and this represented an opportunity to become the first woman hosting a major evening talk show. She didn't make this decision lightly. According to interviews, Joan was terrified. She didn't want to hurt Johnny, but she also recognized that NBC had no intention of giving her The Tonight Show when Carson eventually retired. Worst of all, she discovered from NBC executives that she wasn't even being considered, so she accepted the Fox offer. But the critical mistake was not informing Johnny first. Carson discovered indirectly rather than from Joan directly. He was furious, not with explosive anger that subsides quickly, but with silent, cold, calculated fury. He terminated phone calls when she reached out and refused communication permanently. He didn't respond to her letters and ignored her attempts at reconciliation for years. From that moment, she was excluded, not just from The Tonight Show, but blacklisted entirely. Most significantly, anyone appearing on her Fox program wasn't welcome on Johnny's show either. Insiders who worked on the program said Carson felt blindsided. To him, it wasn't simply about her leaving for another show. It concerned loyalty. He believed she had been deceptive. And in Carson's world, such betrayal was unforgivable. She was like family to him, one former staff member recalled. But once you violated Johnny's trust, you were finished. Joan, meanwhile, was devastated. In later interviews, her voice still broke discussing Johnny. She described him as the most influential figure in her professional life. She mentioned writing him annually, hoping desperately for a response. But nothing ever returned. Not a single word. And the silence wasn't the end. Carson ensured her name vanished from Tonight Show history. For decades, clips of her appearances were suppressed. Her name wasn't mentioned, and she became the program's invisible woman. She later wrote about why she believed Carson was angry about her departure, saying, "I think he genuinely felt, because I was female, that I belonged to him, that I wouldn't leave him. I know this sounds distorted, but I don't otherwise understand what was happening." When Carson died in 2005, Joan admitted crying, not because the world lost an important figure, but because she lost her mentor and the first man who believed in her abilities. She was particularly hurt that he died without them resolving their differences. She once stated in an interview, "I would have done anything to reconcile. I just wanted communication, but he wouldn't even acknowledge me." And Joan wasn't alone. Some faced Carson's displeasure during broadcasts. Not everyone was banned from The Tonight Show for rudeness or disrespect. Some simply didn't know when to stop. Some thought they could provoke him without consequences. But with Johnny Carson, once you crossed a certain boundary, even unintentionally, you were finished. Consider Bobcat Goldthwait, for example. The man was wild with loud, unpredictable energy that either amused or unsettled you. One evening, he exceeded acceptable limits. During a guest appearance, Bobcat actually ignited the chair deliberately during live television. That was his concept of entertainment, but it wasn't well received as it represented humor gone wrong. Though Jay Leno hosted at that time, many believed Carson would have disapproved. The network was outraged and Bobcat was banned from the program. Beyond that, he was arrested and convicted of arson and fined $2,700 plus chair replacement costs around $700. He was also required to create public service announcements about fire safety. He never returned to that stage. That single moment permanently ended his evening television opportunities. Then there's Kathy Griffin. Kathy's entire persona centers on being bold, loud, and unapologetic. She discusses topics most avoid and disregards potential offense. That attitude clashed with many evening hosts, particularly Jay Leno, who succeeded Carson. Kathy's edgy humor was considered excessive, repeatedly. Eventually, she found herself banned from multiple programs, including The Tonight Show. Carson may not have personally banned her, but she certainly matched the profile of someone who wouldn't have satisfied his standards either. A few too many controversial jokes and opportunities quietly disappeared. But then there's Melanie Chardoff, who didn't destroy anything. She didn't use profanity on air or insult anyone on camera. She simply made jokes that seemed insignificant. She typically said things that amused other crew members, and even Johnny himself laughed at her jokes. She was among the few who maintained good relations with Carson, so she experienced no issues with him. She even appeared as a guest on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, including a memorable episode alongside George Burns and Richard Dawson in 1982. That's Carson's nature. He could create or destroy a career, certainly, but if you weren't careful, he could also devastate it, even if you never intended to upset him, even if it was merely a joke whispered backstage. If he misinterpreted it, you were excluded. However, not every Tonight Show ban resulted from defiance or rebellion. Some were misunderstandings, honest mistakes, misinterpreted jokes, or unapproved actions. And suddenly, one move could position you unfavorably with Johnny. Howie Mandel discovered this the hard way. Johnny Carson was still developing his career, still figuring things out, trying to be memorable. So one evening he brought a giant stuffed tiger on stage, a prop not approved by producers, not part of the plan. It was intended to be humorous, silly, just something to generate laughter. One thing Johnny detested was surprises, especially those disrupting the program's flow. So after that evening, Howie was never invited back. No formal ban, no angry correspondence, just silence. Cold, harsh silence. Then there was Lola Falana, who was talented and captivating. She brightened the stage whenever she entered a room. But during one appearance, she spoke candidly about racism in the industry. She described her experience as a black woman in entertainment during a period when most feared discussing such topics. She was honest and courageous, but Johnny wasn't prepared for that conversation on evening television, and just like that, Lola disappeared. She received no further invitations. America wasn't ready to hear those truths in that context, and Carson, despite his influence, wasn't willing to challenge conventions. Artie Lange wasn't excluded. His story takes a different direction. He wasn't banned by Carson. He was banned by Conan O'Brien years later. Artie was battling addiction. He was unpredictable, difficult to manage, so Conan's team severed connections. At the time, it felt devastating. But retrospectively, Artie says it helped him. It forced him to pause and seek help. And when he finally achieved sobriety, he actually thanked Conan. He said being banned initiated his recovery. Sometimes a ban ended your career. Other times, it was simply the harshest wake-up call imaginable. While Johnny Carson typically operated silently, there was one occasion when he actually spoke out. And this time, his words were loud, a Hollywood feud. For a while, Johnny Carson and Wayne Newton shared traditional entertainment industry camaraderie. They were both stars in their respective fields, as Carson dominated evening television from his desk in Burbank, and Newton dazzled Las Vegas audiences with his voice and polished charm. When Wayne appeared on The Tonight Show, it featured smiles, laughter, and handshakes. But in Hollywood, friendships include fine print, and egos don't always coexist harmoniously. Situations changed in the early 1980s when Newton made a bold move outbidding Carson for partial ownership of the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. It wasn't personal, at least from Newton's perspective, because to him, it was strictly business. But to Carson, it felt like a challenge, almost like a friend entering enemy territory. Johnny didn't confront him backstage. He did what he always did and incorporated it into his material. Night after night, Carson began inserting criticisms into his monologues, but they weren't the amusing kind. He mocked Newton's appearance, questioned his masculinity, joked about his lifestyle, and also called him a spiteful human being. These remarks resembled veiled insults more than evening comedy. The audience laughed, but Newton wasn't amused. Eventually, Wayne reached his breaking point, and one day, he stormed into NBC studios without cameras or entourage. He found Carson backstage personally and directly told him to stop. The specifics of that confrontation vary depending on the narrator, but one thing remained constant. Carson stopped joking about Newton, and that's how the teasing ceased, and so did their friendship. Wayne Newton was never invited back to The Tonight Show again, not as a guest, not even for a casual appearance. Carson had acknowledged the message, but like everything in his world, once the curtain dropped, so did the connection. And as Carson's influence grew, so did the problems in his personal life. Before exploring that, let's step back to understand the man behind the curtain, Johnny Carson, and his rise to fame. Long before becoming the king of evening television, Johnny Carson was simply a thin Nebraska youth with playing cards and aspirations. He was barely 12 when he began performing magic tricks for his family, calling himself the Great Carson. He possessed stage presence and could easily maintain anyone's attention without excessive talk. But magic wouldn't remain merely a hobby for Johnny. He needed to utilize his full potential. He served in the Navy during World War II, later graduating from the University of Nebraska with a degree in radio and speech. From there, he paid his dues in minor radio and TV positions, advancing gradually through various jobs. His significant breakthrough came when asked to substitute for Jack Benny, and suddenly, people realized something. Carson wasn't just good, he was natural. By 1962, he assumed leadership of The Tonight Show. That's when true success occurred. Every night, millions watched not just for entertainment, but to feel like they were spending time with someone familiar, someone with sharp wit and perfect timing. Johnny could amuse you without apparent effort. He possessed the rare ability to make you feel he wasn't trying at all, and that created the magic. But offstage presented a different performance. The Johnny everyone saw at 11:30 p.m. wasn't the complete story. Behind the curtain, Carson was intensely private, sometimes painfully so. His friends, colleagues, and even guests who thought they'd connected with him often discovered the hard way that Johnny didn't allow people to get too close. He was charming, certainly, and he enjoyed the camera, but he guarded and controlled what people saw. Everything and everyone had their place, and entering his personal world required more than laughter and a handshake. He detested losing control. That same need to dominate his stage influenced how he managed his relationships, particularly with guests. If someone interrupted him, outperformed him, or took too long reaching the punchline, you could sense the shift. The smile remained, but the atmosphere cooled. Johnny hosted America's most watched evening program, but sometimes he appeared to be the loneliest person present, and that tension followed him off stage into his marriages, his family, and his final years. Personal life in turmoil. Despite his mastery on the soundstage, Johnny Carson's private life was anything but a smooth performance. If the evening television desk was his throne, home was where complications arose. He married 4 times, each relationship telling its own story of yearning, miscommunication, and quiet collapse. His first marriage to Jodie Wolcott began before fame, but as Carson's prominence increased, so did the distance between them. There were rumors of infidelity that he later acknowledged, admitting that faithfulness wasn't his strength. The late nights, the attention, and the ego all eroded anything stable. His second marriage to Joanne Copeland appeared glamorous superficially. She was beautiful, intelligent, and accompanied him during some of his greatest moments. But privately, that marriage was contentious. Infidelity occurred on both sides, and the tension eventually separated them. Carson famously joked about his divorces on air, once quipping that his ex-wives departed with everything except his cufflinks. But sadness existed beneath the sarcasm, and the jokes served as protection. His third marriage to model Joanna Holland similarly followed the pattern with highs, lows, and very public dissolution. But by the time he married Alexis Moss in 1987, something had changed. Perhaps it was age, or he felt his youth had passed, or maybe he finally tired of the spotlight, constantly illuminating his personal space. His final marriage was quieter and more private. From external observation at least, it appeared he'd finally found some peace. But not everything could be repaired. Carson's relationship with Rick, one of his 3 sons from his first marriage, was one of the most publicly strained aspects of his life. Rick struggled with substance abuse, legal troubles, and the pressure of being the son of America's beloved TV host. When Rick died in a tragic car accident in 1991, Carson was devastated. You could see it in his expression the next time he appeared on television. The man who made a nation laugh suddenly appeared vulnerable. When Carson retired in 1992, he didn't linger like many celebrities do. He didn't pursue another project and didn't seek publicity. He simply vanished and relocated to Malibu. He spent more time on his yacht and declined almost every interview. He became reclusive, but he wasn't resentful or anything similar. He simply wanted to conclude his television career and everything associated with it. Despite shutting out the world, the legend of Carson never diminished. Johnny's legacy. Johnny Carson was someone who could make an audience laugh with a single glance, and yet you could spend years around him and never truly know him. His life contained numerous contradictions. On stage, he was quick-witted, magnetic, the epitome of coolness. Offstage, he was reserved, private, and almost inaccessible, and that paradox accompanied him until the very end. By the time the world learned Carson was seriously ill, it was already too late. The man who once commanded millions' attention quietly retreated into obscurity. Emphysema, resulting from lifetime smoking, finally affected him. He died in 2005, and just like that, without ceremony, without prolonged farewell, the curtain fell permanently. However, Johnny never favored extended exits. Still, long before his health declined, Carson had already secured his place in television history. In 1987, he received a Peabody Award celebrating 25 years hosting The Tonight Show, a quarter-century of evening magic, cultural commentary, and pure television mastery. By the mid-1970s, he wasn't just a popular TV host, but also the highest-paid personality on television, earning tens of millions annually. At that level, you recognize his prominence in the entertainment industry. And yet, Carson began withdrawing. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was foresight. He began reducing his appearances, allowing guest hosts to substitute. One such guest host was Joan Rivers. Ironic considering how that relationship concluded, but it remained Carson's program, and even in absence, his presence was always evident. His influence didn't diminish with retirement. You can still observe his impact throughout modern evening television. From Jimmy Fallon's youthful charm to Jimmy Kimmel's sarcastic edge, Carson's influence permeates the structure. The monologues, the desk, segments, the comfortable conversation with guests, it's all Carson's original design. Everyone since has merely added slight variations. Certainly Johnny wasn't perfect. He could be distant, controlling, even cruel occasionally. But he was also a master of his craft, a cultural force, someone who knew how to command attention, even when that attention spanned the entire country. He shaped how America concludes its day with humor, gossip, and considerable style. And that's the curious magic of Johnny Carson. You didn't need to know the man personally to feel connected to him. He left no memoir, no revealing interviews, just the echo of laughter, still playing in evening reruns, reminding us that once upon a time, he ruled the night. Have you watched any of Johnny Carson's programs? And what do you think about how his influence impacted people's lives? Share your thoughts in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell on our channel so you never miss our uploads. Click the next video on your screen to watch more similar content.